Be a hero. Be vegan. Save the world.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule.
People don't usually think of the things that they sit down to eat at dinner could be affecting the climate of the entire planet. So it's really interesting information and really powerful information because it means we can start doing something about it and get a lot of bang for our buck.
Please stay with us to find out more.
Today's program will be presented in English with subtitles in Arabic, Olaxese, also known as Vietnamese, Chinese, Dutch, English, French, German, Hindi, Hungarian, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Mongolian, Persian, Polish, Portuguese, Punjabi, Romanian, Russian, Spanish, Thai, Turkish, and Urdu. Ayakoi means how are you in Tavaluan. I am Alani. The nature-loving people of Tavalu praise your sincere efforts to share the compassionate vegan way of living. May you be renewed in the radiance of the divine. Tavalu is an archipelago of 9 tiny islands located just south of the equator in the South Pacific Ocean. It is one of the smallest and most remote nations in the world, with one airport on the island of Funafuti, its capital. This wondrously beautiful region offers a peaceful environment that is ideal for the rest and relaxation of visitors and locals alike. Tavalu is one of the few countries in the world whose landscape is comprised entirely of coral atolls, which are island reef areas that often encircle protected saltwater lagoons. This creates a spectacular marine environment for the region's 317 colorful fish species, as well as dolphins and majestic whales. The culture of Tavalu is unique, with an emphasis on friendliness and a lifestyle of being close to nature. Each island has its own assembly of elders whose goal is to maintain a peaceful order within the community. Tavaluans enjoy traditional music and dancing, often performed in celebratory dress made from the pandanus plant. The Fatile dance is often the highlight of local events that take place in traditional community structures such as the one in Funafuti's Hand of Friendship Meeting Hall. On November 8, 2009, a climate change conference was held in the U.S. capital of Washington, D.C. to bring attention to the quickest and most effective solution to global warming, the organic vegan diet, titled Humanity's Leap to the Golden Era, Washington, D.C. Climate Change Conference. The event brought together experts of science and health, as well as international ambassadors, media members, and artists. In addition, engaging video messages on the need to address global meat consumption were contributed by esteemed figures including former Indian Environment Minister Maneka Gandhi, former European Parliament member Jens Holm, and leading American nutrition scientist Dr. T. Colin Campbell. The highlight of the afternoon was an informative question and answer session via conference with the guest of honor Supreme Master Ching Hai, who had graciously set aside her busy schedule to discuss ways that humankind could transition toward a brighter era. We now invite you to join us for part 4 of the rebroadcast of the live conference with Supreme Master Ching Hai, titled Humanity's Leap to the Golden Era, Washington, D.C. Climate Change Conference on November 8, 2009 in Washington, D.C., USA.
Our next speaker, Dr. Noam Moore, is a graduate from both Yale and Pennsylvania State Universities. He is currently an adjunct professor of physics at New York University's Polytechnic Institute. Dr. Moore will explain the importance of short-lived greenhouse gases. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Noam Moore.
Thanks, I'm happy to be here. Global warming is one of the biggest environmental threats ever faced by humanity for the sheer scale of the problem. The emissions we emit today are ones that will continue warming the Earth for centuries to come. And with the threats, the risks that temperature increases pose, the rising sea levels, the melting glaciers, the increase in extreme weather phenomena like droughts and hurricanes, people are coming to the point where they realize inaction is impossible. And the question is, what can we best do about it? Traditionally, the focus has been on sources of carbon dioxide, burning gasoline in our gas tanks, burning fossil fuels in our power plants. And of course, very important to address those sources. But it turns out when you look at the data, especially when you focus on the near term, arguably the best place to focus our efforts is on animal agriculture. This is really surprising. People don't usually think of the things that they sit down to eat at dinner could be affecting the climate of the entire planet. So it's really interesting information and really powerful information because it means we can start doing something about it and get a lot of bang for our buck. The UN has said that the livestock sector emerges as one of the top 2 or 3 most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale from local to global. That means every major environmental problem has animal agriculture at the top of the list of causes. I mean, it's amazing to think that one industry, especially this industry, raising animals for food, could be so powerful. But when you realize that it is, it really makes sense that this is also having such a big effect on climate change, and that it is a rich source of opportunity to do something about it. So first, let's see why this is such a big influence. The UN has estimated that 18% of our emissions causing global warming today are due to animal agriculture. For comparison, as Mr. Holm pointed out, all the cars and trucks and SUVs and planes and trains and other modes of transportation in the world together amount to about 12%. So animal agriculture alone is a far bigger chunk of the problem than all those sources, important sources as they are put together. The University of Chicago did a study in which they measured for the average American, if the average American switched their diet to a vegetarian diet, how much global warming would that save? And they found it was about 40% more than if they switched their car in for a hybrid Toyota Prius, which is a big focus of environmentalist efforts to improve our emissions. Definitely, it's a big positive step to switch your car for a Prius, but it's really telling that we can make an even bigger difference by reducing our consumption of animal products. These are big numbers as they are. And we'll talk about why they're such big numbers, and then talk about why these numbers are truly underestimates of the scope of the problem. And it's hard to imagine when you look at one cow in a field. How could this cow be changing the climate for the entire world? If you look at a chicken hatching from its egg, it just doesn't seem like the chicken could be doing much for the entire world. But when you look at the vast numbers of animals involved, it's really staggering. You start to realize the scope of the problem. When you look at the vast numbers involved, it really becomes quite obvious the scope of what we're talking about. In the US alone, in 2008, just to feed Americans, 80 billion animals were killed. The numbers are just hard to get your head around. If you look at the entire animal biomass of the Earth, all the animals in the world, you'll find 1/5 of those are animals we're raising for food. 1 in every 5. So the numbers are just staggering. If you look at the surface of the Earth, 30% of the ice-free land surface of the Earth is being used to raise animals for food, for pasture land, or to grow feed for those animals. So this is a huge part of our economy, a huge part of our human efforts, and so it makes sense that it would be a huge part of our environmental problems. And if you think about it in your own life, how much money you spend on food, how big a part of your life is food, you go outside and see restaurants and supermarkets and so on, the food we eat is a big part of what humans do. And it only makes sense that it's a huge part of the problem. As bad as it is today, as bad as the emissions are from this sector, think about what will happen if we don't do anything. Meat consumption has increased 5 times in the past 50 years, and it's on schedule to double again in the next decade or two. So as bad as things are now, they're only getting worse if we do nothing, and these kind of increases threaten to swamp improvements we make in emissions in other areas. So we absolutely cannot neglect this important area. Why do these animals and their production emit so much global warming gases? Well, people often look at carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is a big part of the problem. And animal agriculture contributes a great deal to carbon dioxide. To produce 1 calorie of animal protein takes 11 times as much energy input as 1 calorie of plant protein production takes. So it's very energy intensive. It takes lots of power. Maneka Gandhi talked about all the different things you have to do to get animals to your plate, from growing far more plants than you would need if you ate them directly in order to feed to the animals, grow the animals, slaughter them at different locations, transport them to your stores, and then finally to your homes, refrigerate them. All that very energy intensive. Among all the species that we eat, fish is probably the worst in this regard, very energy intensive on average. Deforestation is also a big source of these emissions. As we burn forests in order to produce pasture land and farmland to grow feed for animals, we're emitting all the carbon these trees have taken out of the atmosphere during their entire lifetimes, emitting them all at once. That's a huge source of our carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. And if you look at formerly forested Amazon rainforest, now converted into land used for growing animals for food, it amounts to 90% of all the Amazon rainforest that's been deforested since 1970. 90%. So when you see all this deforestation, we need to think it's related to what we sit down and eat at mealtime. The deforestation also emits black carbon, which is very efficient at absorbing light. And that adds an extra danger as this very absorbing material can float through the atmosphere into places like Antarctica, which are very bright and reflect sunlight. Reflecting sunlight is good because it keeps the Earth cooler, but as black carbon floats down to Antarctica, absorbing more sunlight, it presents a danger of increasing melting there. And melting of Antarctic ice has dramatic potential effects on global sea levels and coastal flooding. So there's a lot of dangers just on the carbon dioxide side. But other gases also pose a big problem. And the other gases are often overlooked in all the focus on carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is produced by far in the greatest quantities of all the gases we emit, but it's not the most powerful at warming the Earth at all. Other gases can be much more powerful at warming the Earth. Methane, for example, causes 25 times as much warming as carbon dioxide over 100 years. Other gases, like nitrous oxide, can be about 300 times, cause 300 times more warming over 100 years. Those are numbers that are often taken into account, and as a result, when you look back at historical warming, carbon dioxide is responsible for about half the problem, and other gases, mainly methane, is responsible for the other half. So it's important not to overlook these other gases. But when you look at near-term warming, the numbers are bigger than are usually calculated. If you look over 20 years, methane is not 25 times more powerful. it's 72 times more powerful. So all the numbers that are calculated by the UN, by the Chicago study, by lots of studies, which look at the standard of what happens over 100 years, are skewed when you look at the near-term effects. And in the near-term effects, sources of other gases, like sources of methane, have an outsized effect. And the #1 source of methane worldwide is animal agriculture. So that's one reason why animal agriculture has a bigger effect than even these large numbers suggest. Another reason why animal agriculture has a bigger cause than most numbers suggest is aerosols. Aerosols are the tiny particles that make up smog. Whenever we burn fossil fuels, they emit heat-trapping carbon dioxide. They also emit aerosols. Aerosols are bad for our health, but they also reflect sunlight and therefore cool the Earth. If you look historically at the amount of warming caused by carbon dioxide and the amount of cooling caused by aerosols, it's hard to calculate the effect of aerosols because there's a lot of uncertainty. But roughly, they're on the same scale. So much of the warming we've been seeing has been caused by these other gases, by the sources of other gases rather than sources of carbon dioxide, because those sources have been emitting carbon dioxide and heat-reflecting aerosols. That doesn't mean we don't need to worry ourselves about burning fossil fuels, because carbon dioxide lasts in the atmosphere for centuries. Our emissions are ones we're stuck with for hundreds of years, while aerosols only last for a short time. And we're getting rid of them from the environment anyway because they're bad for our health. So it's not a reason not to do anything about power plants and vehicles. But it does mean that in the near term, sources of other gases, of which animal agriculture is the biggest source, have a truly outsized effect on the warming we're seeing and will be seeing in the near term. So when you look at methane, you realize that the biggest source is our meat production. Produces about 100 million tons a year, most of it in the form of digestion. These animals can digest things that we can't eat, like grass, and they do it through a special process, through bacteria in their gut, that emit methane. So the huge numbers of animals we produce end up producing huge amounts of methane. The biggest culprit is dairy production. They produce more methane than any other source. But another source is the manure they produce, which tends to be kept in huge manure lagoons, acres and acres of cesspools, all emitting this methane. And when it comes to manure, pig production is the biggest culprit. They all produce methane. Right now, the air we're breathing has more than double the methane it did before industrialization. So the effect has been really big, and this methane is very powerful at trapping heat. So when you look overall, this is a very powerful message, because it means we can have a really big impact on the climate change problem, an impact that most people aren't aware they can have. It's very empowering. When you look at it, not only is the effect big, but if we try to address the problem through reductions in animal agriculture, we get benefits of quick turnaround. Even if we stopped selling cars that were inefficient and produced lots of carbon dioxide, it would still take years for the cars that are on the road to no longer be driven. And the turnaround time for power plants is much longer, while the turnaround time for farmed animals is really pretty short. Even the longest-lived farmed animals today generally live only up to 2 years. So changes we make today are quickly implemented. They also mean quick results. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for centuries. It's still very important to deal with carbon dioxide for that very reason, but methane is in the atmosphere for only about 12 years. So if we make reductions in methane sources, the biggest one being animal agriculture, we will quickly see changes in near-term effects. This is extremely important to remember the near term because we are approaching tipping points in the next few years which could cause irreversible changes. And anything we can do to slow the process of getting to that point is urgent. By addressing through animal agriculture, we can also increase sources of carbon sinks. Right now, 70% of the world's agricultural land is being used to raise animals for food. By having the opportunity to return some of that land to its natural state, we allow to grow the plants that were destroyed before that serve to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Targeting animal agriculture is also a lot cheaper than other sources because it is easy for anyone to choose one source of food versus another source of food every time they sit down to dinner. It's a lot harder for a person to say, no, I want to switch from burning fossil fuels to solar or wind power. That takes an investment and longer-term plan, one study found that we could reduce the economic burden of reaching our climate targets by 80% if we focused on animal agriculture rather than traditional sources. Finally, it's really empowering to people who see this problem around the world and get frustrated when political leaders don't seem to be doing anything, and they feel helpless. People feel helpless. Knowing that what people eat every time they sit down to dinner makes a difference for the entire world means we can each make a difference. Every time we sit down to dinner, simply by switching your hamburger to a veggie burger, you can make a difference for the future of the planet, for the health of the planet. It's a message which people can take with them that's positive and which they can implement in their own lives. So this is an unparalleled opportunity to make great progress in addressing global warming, curbing global warming, particularly in the near term, while reducing the economic burden of doing so, and at the same time addressing all the other environmental problems that the UN said animal agriculture is also a top contributor to. It's just great news to know that what's good for you, for your health, is also good for the planet. This is not a replacement for all the other important strategies that people talk about, but it is the one that may give us the biggest bang for our buck. Thanks.
Many thanks, Dr. Moore, for sharing your research on the sources and effects of increased atmospheric methane. There's new evidence that livestock raising may actually contribute much more to climate change than previously thought. The World Watch Institute has released a new study called Livestock and Climate Change, which states, and I quote, "Our analysis shows that livestock and their byproducts actually account for at least 51% of annual worldwide greenhouse gas emissions," end quote.
Yes, Brian, I read that too. And the livestock industry not only contributes to climate change, it is also a root cause in many of our infectious diseases. Our next speaker will tell us more.
Warning: you might find the content herein disturbing, but the truth must be revealed.
My name is Noah Moore. I'm a physicist at City University of New York. I've worked in climate change issues for many years, both for nonprofits and through my own research. I've done a lot of work on it, and I'm very excited to be here making a difference, hopefully, for the future of the world. We're facing a climate catastrophe, and it's critical that we do whatever we can today, especially things that will make a difference in the near term. It turns out that one of the most powerful things we can do is to address the problem via what we sit down to eat at every time we sit down to dinner. It turns out that the biggest bang for our buck we get in addressing climate change is by reducing or eliminating the animal products we eat. They are a cause of far more warming than most people realize. And when you look at the near-term effects, their impact is even greater.
My name's Steve Delaney, and I'm a vegetarian, and I was demonstrating from the White House for vegetarianism, and someone invited me here. I was had a couple signs against SUVs, and I had another sign that said animals suffer like hell at slaughterhouses, laboratories, and farms, and that people should go vegetarian. Because of I used to live out in the country, and a lot of when they're slaughtered, you usually blow their brains out, and at the bigger slaughterhouses they use the bolt guns, and it's extraordinarily painful for the animals, obviously. And I think most humans just want to ignore that it's as painful in animals as it is essentially in humans. And that animals are the most helpless members of our society, and that they suffer the most pain in human society as our domestic animals. I think that it's simple enough to go vegetarian. It takes a little work the first couple of months, and then you get used to it. And then you realize that even though the animal can't talk, it suffers a lot of really intense pain. You know, even on the farm before you slaughter it, you blow its head off, or you use a knife and cut its throat. It's pretty bad. It's for instance, I know people who raised animals like chinchillas and other animals for furs, and you would electrocute them from, the rear, and it was very, very, very painful. So it's just easy enough to be a vegetarian and a lot less painful. I learned a lot. There's some other organizations that are interested in vegetarianism, and I really didn't realize that the relationship of that with global warming, the methane from the slaughterhouses, and I didn't realize that like 18% of the problem was due to animal farming and things like that.
All information concerning the scientific evidence of climate change and its solution is in Supreme Master Ching Hai's book, From Crisis to Peace, free for download at crisistopeace.org.
Serene viewers, thank you for your presence today on Words of Wisdom. Please join us tomorrow for part 5 of this conference with Supreme Master Ching Hai. May your loving kindness extend to all beings in the mercy of the Providence.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule et suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visiten suprememastertv.com/schedule y suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Nossos programas oferecem vários idiomas. Acesse suprememastertv.com/schedule e suprememastertv.com/WOW.
Be vegan, make peace.